The first cookies were invented as a food for Nelson's Navy. Because they are dry, they keep a long time. Nowadays, Nelson wouldn't recognize his old ship's rations. They've changed so much. Cookies are really bread or cake that's been dried with extra baking. The main ingredients are wheat flour, fat, and sugar. Water helps the process, but is not a final ingredient. Wheat is the best grain to provide flour because the proteins in it have special properties that are most suitable for cookie making. This is a cross-section of a grain of wheat. The outer shell is the bran. The germ is the part that will germinate and grow. The white substance is starch, and the network or matrix, as it is called, is protein. The bran and the germ are removed, and what's left is the flour, a mixture of starch and protein. A lot of the skill in cookie making depends on the way this protein is handled. This is what dough looks like under the microscope before it's mixed. You can clearly see the large globules of starch and protein. Here we've drawn the globules of protein unraveling as the dough is mixed. Each strand reaches out and joins other strands, making a continuous network or matrix. The microscope shows here exactly what the protein matrix looks like. The strands are elastic, allowing the dough to stretch. This is a perfect dough. If we kept mixing, eventually the strands would break, and then the dough would be useless because the matrix has been destroyed. This is the dough mixing floor. The flour and water come down these chutes, and the extra ingredients are added from bins on the factory floor. Here, the dough is rolled out, getting thinner each time it passes through these giant rolling machines. Soda crackers have about 8 very thin layers with pockets of air inside. It's very hard to make the layers so thin. To make the dough soft and elastic, some of it is fermented with yeast. Yeast and other microorganisms are added to the flour and water. Because the ferment was added to the mix, the sheet is quite elastic. But there are limits to how much it can be stretched in one direction. So this is how the problem is solved. Before the dough is stretched too much, it's folded sideways. And now when the rollers press the dough, it's being pulled across the grain and the protein doesn't break. And this is really 8 sheets that will separate when the cracker is baked. This is the cutter where the shapes are formed. The scraps are sent back to be recycled into another sheet. These are crackers. The dough is mainly flour and water. They are distinctly different to cookies.
The main difference between these two products here, Jats and Scotch Finger, is the texture. This product, Jats, has a hard, crisp, flinty texture. This product, Scotch Finger, has a soft, short texture. The main reason for the differences in texture is the amount of shortening, sugar and water that we add to these two recipes.
Shortening is oil or fat. If it's added at this stage after the dough is mixed, it would not affect this matrix. However, if fat or vegetable oil is added before mixing, the protein fibers don't join very well. Rather than stretch, the dough breaks off short. This is why fat or oil is called shortening.
These are our two types of dough. This dough here is the Scotch Finger dough. As you can see, it's very short, very crumbly. That's due to the high amount of fat content in the dough. This dough here is far more extensible, stretchy. With this dough we can layer it, sheet it out and layer it to give a nice flaky texture in the biscuit.
This is the cracker dough that's mainly flour and water. Now you can see the difference shortening makes. This dough is far too weak to form a sheet. It would break up. So cookies made from this dough need to be formed in a different way. A roller with a pattern recessed into it is often used. Of course, the roll can have a variety of shapes on it. And it's quite a skilled job producing the rollers.
What we're doing here is rebuilding this roller. This first section was installed so that we could run a trial and made sure that the product was suitable for what we wanted to make. The trial was a success, so now we finish rebuilding the roller and put the roller into production. It's got to be pretty accurate. Each piece has to go into a particular location, and on this particular roller there's 3 different types of segments, so they've got to be installed into the correct location. It just makes for a better product and a better sheet out of the cutter.
Wire cutting is another way of forming a cookie out of short dough. The wire cuts it off as it is extruded or pushed through the die. The wire cut gives a particular texture to the cookie. A very crisp bread can also be formed by extruding through a die. The flour and water mix is pumped through a hot pressurized cylinder. The water inside the mix is boiled and steam forms bubbles in the dough. At this stage, the dough is still quite soft. To become crisp, it must be dried in the second stage of baking. It's now a crisp bread. In a commercial oven, first a high heat cooks the mixture. Then, as they move along the conveyor belt, a low, slow heat dries them out. Most baking is done in a tunnel oven that can be up to 90 meters long. At first, the oven is very hot, about 230 degrees Celsius. Cracker baking goes through various stages. First, the fat melts, and this helps separate the layers. Then the water boils off, creating steam, which causes the cracker to rise. This process takes less than a minute because it's so hot. As the temperature increases, the structure inside the cracker sets as the protein becomes rigid. This gives the final shape to the cracker. With further heat, the color develops. Cracker making is a highly controlled process using just enough heat to develop the crackers to a uniform quality. Quality control is also very important. Every 10 minutes, the final product is checked for moisture, color, and weight. From the oven, they go onto a long conveyor where the crackers are cooled. This is even slower than baking, about 1.5 times as long. Staff working on the packing room floor wear special hygienic clothing, including caps with hairnets and gloves. To prevent contamination, this metal detector automatically rejects any suspect packets. Here it's being tested by placing a piece of metal onto the packet, and sure enough, it's rejected. We decide to try a further test by placing a coin on a packet. And it's also rejected. This soda cracker is the factory's most popular line and are produced non-stop. All packets go through a metal detector which also rejects packets that are underweight. Some lines have a filling known as cream. This is made from a blend of sugar, corn flour, and some fat. It's mixed and added like this.
I've been on this machine, doing these biscuits for 9 years, and I think I've got it down to a fine art. My job is to make sure that the cream is in the center of the biscuit and that there's no scrap going down the other end. We've got to make sure that the biscuits weigh the right amount. If they're underweight, they've got to be thrown out, so you always make sure you weigh your biscuits every 10 minutes.
These days, machines can produce many different types of cookies. But it's taken years of work to make it all run smoothly. These cookies are having one side coated with chocolate. If the cookie has to be covered all round with chocolate, it has the bottom coated as before, but it also passes through a curtain of chocolate. The process is known as enrobing. After being coated, a blast of air blows away the excess and gives it a pattern. By adjusting the strength of the blast, the thickness of the chocolate can be varied. The extra chocolate drains back into the tank below, where it's used again. After cooling, the cookies are ready to be packaged. The boxes from various production lines all head for the warehouse to be date stamped. Watch the space under the assorted creams. As it passes the inkjet, the date is very quickly painted on the side. This stamp helps warehouse staff make sure the first batch in is always the first to go out to the customer. This is known as stock rotation. As the orders come in from the stores, the goods are assembled into pallet loads. To help cut costs, a factory will produce only a few cookie lines. It is cheaper to send cookies right across the country than trying to make and store different lines. But there's more to it than just making cookies. Other departments sell the product and manage finances, forming a large management network. One of these sections develops new cookies and has a pilot plant specially designed to make samples. The people working here are food technologists. It's their job to try out new cookie recipes. These two are working on a cookie version of pumpkin scones.
Hi, my job is to develop new types of biscuits. Today I'm making a rice crispy biscuit which has puffed rice in it. And what will be done with that is that it's going to be coated in chocolate, and then we're going to pass it around the lab and decide if we like it or not. And if we like it, then we'll test it in the factory.
The first step is to prepare a test mixture and then run a trial batch in the pilot plant.
We've got to fill up the back roll which forces the dough through. So we'll know soon. There's some biscuits coming out now. If it's not machinable, there's no point making it because it won't run in the factory. Seems to be coming out better than what it was before. That's because we've wet the web, and so the dough's sticking to the web.
Of course, not every trial is an instant success, and often it's back to the mixing bowl for the food technologists working on a new formula. Once all the new ingredients are mixed, it goes back to the pilot plant.
They're working this time. We've modified the dough and it's working well.
Now these cookies are ready to be baked. This test is to see whether the cookies can be chocolate coated on one side. Like a lot of new lines, this one has a few problems. It's lighter than normal and a bit bigger too. With a few adjustments, finally a working combination is found. All cookies go through another important test, this time a sensory test. Here, the judges are isolated inside these cubicles to keep the test unbiased. They'll check on sweetness, texture, and of course, the flavor. All the results are tallied, and the cookie is given a report.
Has a very rich chocolate flavour and quite a crisp biscuit.
Coming up with new product lines is important. Perhaps one day, you too could be developing the cookie of the future.